I inherited $2 million, and my parents tried to have me declared mentally unfit to steal it. When my grandmother left me $2 million, I never imagined my own parents would try to have me declared mentally incompetent just to get their hands on it. Michael, 28, that's who I am. Or at least that's who I thought I was until 3 months ago when my world came crashing down around me. It all started with a phone call that would change my life forever. My grandmother, Eleanor, the one who raised me when my parents were too busy with their own lives, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 87, and while her death wasn't unexpected, the grief still hit me like a physical blow. Grandma Eleanor had been my rock, my anchor in the stormy seas of life. She was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, who bandaged my scraped knees, who attended every school play and graduation ceremony when my parents were too busy with their high-powered careers. She had a kind heart and a sharp mind, even in her later years. And as it turned out, she had quite a substantial nest egg. 2 weeks after her funeral, I was summoned to the reading of her will. I expected to inherit some sentimental items, perhaps a small amount of money to help with my student loans. What I didn't expect was to learn that my grandmother, who had lived modestly in the same small house for over 50 years, had amassed a fortune of $2 million. And even more shocking, she had left it all to me. I sat in the lawyer's office, stunned into silence as the will was read. My parents, Robert and Diane, sat beside me, their faces unreadable. When the lawyer announced that I was the sole beneficiary of the entire $2 million estate, I felt a mix of emotions: grief for my grandmother's passing, shock at her unexpected wealth, and confusion about why she had never mentioned it. My parents' reaction was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. A quick glance between them, a slight tightening of my mother's jaw, the way my father's hand clenched into a fist for just a moment before relaxing. I dismissed it as grief, thinking they were perhaps disappointed not to have been included in the will. After all, they were her son and daughter-in-law. But I would soon discover that their reaction had nothing to do with disappointment and everything to do with greed. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings with financial advisors. I decided to take some time off from my job as a software developer to process everything and figure out what to do with the inheritance. My parents were unusually supportive, offering to help me manage the money, suggesting investment opportunities, and even recommending financial planners they trusted. It was during one of these meetings with a recommended financial planner that I first sensed something was off. The planner seemed more interested in my parents' opinions than mine, kept referring to them as the decision makers, and seemed surprised when I insisted on reviewing all documents myself before signing anything. A week later, while going through some papers at my parents' house, where I was staying temporarily, I stumbled upon a file that had been left carelessly on the kitchen table. It was labeled Michael's guardianship. Curious, I opened it, not understanding what it could possibly mean. What I found inside would shake the very foundation of my relationship with my parents and reveal a decade-long pattern of manipulation I had never noticed before. The file contained legal documents filed just days after my grandmother's death, in which my parents were petitioning the court to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own finances. They were seeking to be appointed as my legal guardians, which would give them complete control over the $2 million inheritance. The documents cited evidence of my inability to handle money, including a bounced check from 5 years ago and a credit card debt I had paid off 2 years ago. As I sat there reading the carefully crafted lies my parents had prepared to present to a judge, I felt a cold dread creep over me. This wasn't about concern for my well-being, it was about greed. My own parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, were willing to destroy my reputation and my autonomy just to get their hands on my inheritance. And this wasn't the first time they had tried to manipulate my financial situation, as I would soon discover. The file contained references to previous attempts to control my finances, dating back to when I had first started working part-time in high school. That night, I packed a bag and left my parents' house, checking into a hotel under a different name. I knew I was in for the fight of my life, and I needed to prepare myself for the battle ahead. Little did I know just how deep the rabbit hole of my parents' deception went, or how much they had already taken from me without my knowledge. The first night in the hotel was sleepless. I kept replaying every interaction with my parents over the years, searching for clues I might have missed. How could I have been so blind? The signs had been there all along, I just hadn't wanted to see them. My mind raced, jumping from one memory to another, each now tainted with the knowledge of my parents' true intentions. I remembered my first job at 16, working at the local grocery store. My parents had insisted on opening a joint bank account with me to help me learn how to manage my money properly. At the time, I thought they were being responsible parents. Now, I wondered how much of my hard-earned money had disappeared into that account without my knowledge. Then there was the time I had received a scholarship for college. My parents had handled all the paperwork, and I had trusted them to do what was best. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if they had somehow diverted those funds for their own use. The more I thought about it, the more instances I recalled of my parents taking control of my finances under the guise of helping me. When I bought my first car, they had insisted on handling the negotiations and paperwork. When I received my first real paycheck after college, they had advised me to let them invest a portion of it for my future. Each time, I had willingly handed over control, never questioning their motives. But the most painful realization was that this pattern of manipulation wasn't just about money, it was about control. My parents had been controlling every aspect of my life for as long as I could remember, and I had been too blind to see it. They had dictated my choice of college, my major, even my circle of friends. Any time I had tried to assert my independence, they had found a way to reel me back in, usually by using money as leverage. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer recommended by a trusted friend. I didn't reveal the full extent of the situation, just that I needed help with an inheritance issue. We agreed to meet that afternoon, and I spent the morning gathering all the documents I had taken from my parents' house, as well as any financial records I could access online. As I sifted through years of bank statements and tax returns, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. There were numerous withdrawals and transfers that I didn't recognize, many of them made during periods when my parents had been helping me manage my finances. The amounts varied, from a few $100s to several thousand, but collectively they added up to a substantial sum. I also found evidence of credit cards and loans taken out in my name that I had no knowledge of. Some had been paid off, others were still active with outstanding balances. It seemed my parents had been using my identity and credit to finance their lifestyle for years, all while presenting themselves as successful, financially savvy individuals. By the time I met with the lawyer, I had a thick folder of documents that painted a damning picture of my parents' financial exploitation. The lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Catherine in her late 40s, listened patiently as I explained the situation, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When I finished, she sat in silence for a moment, reviewing the documents I had brought. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Michael," she said, her voice measured and calm, "what you've uncovered here goes far beyond simple financial exploitation. This is a case of identity theft, fraud, and emotional manipulation. We need to act quickly to protect what's left of your inheritance and to hold your parents accountable for their actions." Over the next few hours, Catherine outlined a plan of action. We would file a temporary restraining order to prevent my parents from accessing any of my accounts or making any further financial moves in my name. We would also file a countersuit to their petition for guardianship, challenging their claims of my incompetence and presenting evidence of their financial exploitation. As we worked, Catherine explained that cases like mine were more common than people realized, especially when large inheritances were involved. She had seen families torn apart by greed, parents betraying their children, siblings turning against each other. But even she seemed shocked by the extent of my parents' deception and the long duration of their financial exploitation. By the time I left Catherine's office that evening, I felt a mix of emotions. There was fear about the legal battle ahead, anger at my parents' betrayal, but also a sense of relief that I was finally taking control of my life. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, I felt empowered to face it. That night, back in my hotel room, I received a text from my mother. "Where are you, honey? We're worried about you." I stared at the message, the words of concern now feeling like a manipulation tactic. How many times over the years had they used similar words to control me? How many times had I fallen for it? I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the task ahead, preparing for the legal battle that would determine not just my financial future, but my very autonomy as an adult. I knew my parents wouldn't give up without a fight, and I braced myself for what was to come, unaware of just how far they would go to maintain control. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After a sleepless night spent reviewing documents and mentally preparing for the days ahead, I met Catherine at the courthouse to file the necessary legal motions. The building was imposing, all marble floors and high ceilings, filled with the quiet urgency of countless legal battles being fought within its walls. As we stood in line to file the paperwork, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was the nervousness of stepping into unfamiliar territory, the anger at having to take legal action against my own parents, and the determination to reclaim my life and my inheritance. Catherine stood beside me, a reassuring presence in the chaos of the courthouse. Once the paperwork was filed, we headed to a nearby cafe to discuss strategy over coffee. Catherine explained that the temporary restraining order had been granted, which meant my parents couldn't access any of my accounts or make any financial moves in my name. She also informed me that a court date had been set for the following week to address both their petition for guardianship and our countersuit. "This is just the beginning, Michael," Catherine said, her expression serious. "Your parents will likely fight back, and they may try to discredit you in any way they can. We need to be prepared for that." Over the next few days, I worked closely with Catherine to build our case. We gathered financial records, collected evidence of my parents' manipulation, and prepared for the upcoming court hearing. I also reached out to my grandmother's lawyer, who had handled her will, to see if he had any insight into why she had chosen to leave everything to me. His response was illuminating. He confirmed that my grandmother had been aware of my parents' financial exploitation and had deliberately chosen to leave the inheritance to me in a way that would make it difficult for them to access. She had even included a clause in the will stating that if I was ever deemed mentally incompetent, the inheritance would be placed in a trust managed by a court-appointed trustee, not my parents. This revelation was both comforting and heartbreaking. Comforting to know that my grandmother had tried to protect me, even after her death. Heartbreaking to realize that she had known about my parents' exploitation and hadn't been able to stop it during her lifetime. As the court date approached, the reality of the situation began to sink in. I was about to go to court against my own parents to expose their manipulation and exploitation in a public setting. The thought was terrifying, but also empowering. For the first time, I was taking a stand, refusing to be a victim of their greed. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining different scenarios, rehearsing what I would say, how I would react. I wondered if my parents would show any remorse, if they would even acknowledge what they had done. Or would they continue to deny everything, painting me as an ungrateful, mentally unstable son who was falsely accusing them? The next morning, I dressed in the suit Catherine had advised me to wear, trying to project an image of responsibility and stability. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. This wasn't the same Michael who had blindly trusted his parents, who had allowed them to control every aspect of his life. This was a new Michael, one who was fighting for his autonomy and his future. When I arrived at the courthouse, Catherine was already there, waiting for me with a reassuring smile. My parents and their lawyer were already in the courtroom, and as I entered, I felt their eyes on me. My mother's face was a mask of concern, while my father's expression was cold and calculating. I avoided eye contact, taking a seat beside Catherine. The hearing began with my parents' lawyer presenting their case for guardianship. He painted a picture of a young man overwhelmed by sudden wealth, incapable of making sound financial decisions. He cited the bounced check and credit card debt mentioned in the petition, as well as what he described as erratic behavior since receiving the inheritance. Then it was our turn. Catherine calmly and methodically dismantled their case, presenting evidence of my responsible financial behavior, my stable employment history, and, most damningly, the extensive documentation of my parents' financial exploitation. She called witnesses, including my grandmother's lawyer, who testified about her concerns regarding my parents' handling of finances. The turning point came when Catherine presented evidence of the numerous credit cards and loans taken out in my name without my knowledge. As the documents were displayed, I watched my parents' faces. My mother's mask of concern crumbled, replaced by a look of panic. My father's composure remained, but I could see the muscle working in his jaw, a telltale sign of his anger. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. As I swore to tell the truth, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I spoke clearly and confidently, describing the discovery of the guardianship papers, the evidence of financial exploitation, and the pattern of control and manipulation I had only recently recognized. As I spoke, I occasionally glanced at my parents. My mother had tears in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just for show. My father stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. I wondered what was going through their minds. Were they feeling any remorse, or were they just angry at being caught? After what felt like hours, the testimony was over, and the judge announced that she would need time to review the evidence before making a decision. As we left the courtroom, my mother tried to approach me, but Catherine intercepted her, advising her not to make contact until the judge's ruling. Back in the car, Catherine seemed optimistic about our chances, but warned me to be prepared for any outcome. "Parents like yours don't give up easily, Michael," she said. "Even if the judge rules in your favor, this may not be over." As I sat in my hotel room that evening, waiting for the judge's decision, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a few weeks. I had gone from a grieving grandson to a legal adversary, fighting against my own parents for control of my life and my inheritance. But as difficult as this journey had been, I knew it was necessary. I was no longer the passive victim of my parents' manipulation. I was taking control, ready to face whatever came next. 3 days passed in agonizing slowness as I awaited the judge's decision. Each morning I would wake up hoping for a call from Catherine, and each evening I would go to bed disappointed, my stomach in knots. The hotel room had started to feel like a prison, its four walls a constant reminder of the limbo I was living in. During this time, I did my best to distract myself, diving into work on a new software project and reconnecting with friends I had neglected during my parents' reign of control. It was during one of these conversations with an old college friend, Thomas, that I learned something that would change the course of my legal battle. Thomas and I had been roommates in college and had remained friends over the years, though my parents had always discouraged our friendship, claiming Thomas was a bad influence. As we caught up over video chat, I mentioned my legal situation, careful not to reveal too many details. To my surprise, Thomas nodded knowingly. "I'm not surprised, man," he said. "Your parents always seemed a bit controlling. Remember that time they tried to convince you to drop out of the entrepreneurship club? They told everyone it was because you were failing your classes, but I knew that wasn't true." This memory sparked something in my mind. I had completely forgotten about the entrepreneurship club, which my parents had forced me to quit despite my passion for it. Their excuse had been that it was taking too much time away from my studies, but now I wondered if there was another reason. As we talked, more memories surfaced. The summer internship I had turned down because my parents claimed it was too risky. The investment opportunity I had passed on because they said it was too complicated. The business idea I had abandoned because they convinced me I wasn't experienced enough. Each instance, which I had previously dismissed as parental concern, now seemed like part of a larger pattern of control. After our call, I spent hours jotting down these memories, creating a timeline of my parents' interference in my life and career. The pattern was undeniable. Whenever I had shown initiative or independence, they had found a way to derail my plans, always under the guise of looking out for my best interests. The next morning, I shared this information with Catherine, who immediately recognized its significance. "This isn't just about financial exploitation, Michael," she said, her eyes wide with realization. "This is about your parents systematically undermining your confidence and independence to maintain control. We need to incorporate this into our case." Catherine suggested we reach out to some of the people mentioned in my timeline, including former professors, internship supervisors, and even Thomas, to gather testimonies about my capabilities and my parents' interference. Over the next few days, we conducted a series of interviews, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle. My former entrepreneurship professor remembered me as one of his most promising students and recalled a tense meeting with my parents where they had insisted I withdraw from the club. The supervisor of the internship I had turned offer remembered me as an exceptional candidate and was surprised when I had declined the position. Even more damning was the testimony from a financial advisor my parents had consulted years ago regarding a small inheritance I had received from a great-aunt. The advisor remembered my parents asking about ways to legally access the funds without my knowledge, claiming I was too irresponsible to manage the money myself. As these testimonies accumulated, a clearer picture emerged. My parents hadn't just been exploiting me financially, they had been actively sabotaging my personal and professional growth to maintain their control. The realization was both infuriating and heartbreaking. On the 5th day after the hearing, the call finally came. Catherine's voice was tight with excitement as she informed me that the judge had made her decision. We were to appear in court the next morning to hear the ruling. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. Would the judge rule in my favor? Or would my parents succeed in their attempt to have me declared incompetent? As I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about my grandmother and what she would want me to do. I knew she would want me to fight, to stand up for myself, no matter the outcome. The next morning, as I walked into the courtroom, I felt a sense of calm determination. This time, I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for my autonomy, for the right to make my own decisions and live my own life. Whatever the outcome, I knew I would never again allow my parents to control me. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered the courtroom and took her seat. As she began to speak, her eyes scanned the room, briefly landing on each of us before she began to deliver her ruling. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, she began, her voice clear and firm, "I have reached a decision regarding the petition for guardianship filed by Robert and Diane Thompson, as well as the countersuit filed by their son, Michael Thompson." As she continued, I could feel the tension in the room, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment that would determine my future. I held my breath, waiting for the words that would change my life one way or another. After careful review of all evidence and testimonies, the judge continued, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "I find no merit in the petition filed by Robert and Diane Thompson to have their son, Michael Thompson, declared mentally incompetent. On the contrary, the evidence presented suggests that Michael is a capable, responsible adult who has been systematically manipulated and financially exploited by his parents for years." A wave of relief washed over me so intense I felt dizzy. Beside me, Catherine squeezed my hand, a small smile playing on her lips. Across the room, my mother's face had gone pale, while my father's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought it might break. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am denying the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, based on the evidence of identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. In the meantime, a temporary freeze will be placed on all accounts controlled by Robert and Diane Thompson until a full forensic audit can be conducted." As the judge spoke, I could feel the weight of years of manipulation lifting from my shoulders. This was more than just a legal victory. It was validation of everything I had experienced, confirmation that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful, but a victim of my parents' greed and control. The judge wasn't finished, however. Regarding the inheritance left by Eleanor Thompson to her grandson Michael Thompson, the court recognizes his right to manage these funds as he sees fit. However, given the circumstances, the court recommends that Michael consider working with a financial advisor of his own choosing to ensure proper management of these assets. With a final bang of her gavel, the judge declared the hearing adjourned. As people began to file out of the courtroom, my mother rushed toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Michael, please," she sobbed, reaching for my arm. "We're your parents. We love you. We were just trying to protect you." I stepped back, out of her reach, her words like poison in my ears. "Protect me?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "You stole from me. You lied about me. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my inheritance. How is that protection?" My father stood back, his expression unreadable, but I could see the anger simmering in his eyes. He wasn't sorry, he was angry at being caught. Catherine stepped between us, her presence a buffer against my mother's desperate pleas. "Miss Thompson, I advise you to maintain your distance. There are serious legal consequences for your actions, and any attempt to contact or influence Michael could be considered harassment." As we left the courtroom, my mother's cries echoed behind us, but I didn't look back. The chapter of my life where I was a victim of my parents' manipulation was over. Now, I had to focus on rebuilding and moving forward. Over the next few weeks, life moved at a dizzying pace. The forensic audit revealed the full extent of my parents' financial exploitation, and the numbers were staggering. Over the past decade, they had siphoned off nearly $200,000 from various accounts in my name, using the money to fund their lavish lifestyle, including luxury vacations, expensive cars, and even a vacation home they had presented as a family investment. The district attorney's office took the case seriously, and within a month, both my parents were formally charged with multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The legal process would be lengthy, but for the first time, I felt that justice was being served. With the legal battles underway, I turned my attention to rebuilding my life. I found a new apartment, a modest but comfortable space that was entirely mine. I reconnected with old friends like Thomas, who stood by me as I navigated this difficult period. I even reached out to the entrepreneurship professor from college, who offered to mentor me as I explored business ideas. The inheritance, now securely in an account that only I could access, provided a safety net that allowed me to take risks I had never been able to consider before. I quit my job as a software developer and started my own company, focusing on creating educational software for children with learning disabilities, a passion I had abandoned years ago at my parents' insistence. As I immersed myself in this new chapter of my life, I began to understand the depth of my parents' control. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. They had systematically undermined my confidence and independence, creating a dependency that ensured I would always turn to them for guidance and approval. The inheritance had threatened this delicate balance, offering me a path to independence they couldn't control. 3 months after the court ruling, I received a call from my mother. She was crying, her voice barely recognizable. She told me that my father had left her, unable to face the legal consequences of his actions. She was alone, facing criminal charges, and wanted to see me. I agreed to meet her, not out of forgiveness, but out of a need for closure. We met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop where we wouldn't be disturbed. As I sat across from her, I barely recognized the woman who had raised me. She looked older, smaller, her face etched with regret. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she said, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her coffee mug. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Your father, he convinced me it was for the best, that you weren't capable of handling money on your own." I listened silently, her words washing over me without making an impact. I wanted to believe her, to see this as a genuine moment of remorse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another manipulation tactic. "Why, Mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this to me, to your own son?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "Greed, I guess," she finally admitted. "And fear. We were living beyond our means, and when we found out about your grandmother's inheritance, we saw a way out. Your father convinced me that you would waste it, that we could manage it better for you. But the truth is, we just wanted it for ourselves." As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure, but not forgiveness. My mother's admission didn't excuse her actions, but it did provide a glimpse into the twisted logic that had driven them to betray their own child. It was a sad, pathetic ending to a relationship that had never been what it appeared to be. Back in my apartment, I looked around at the life I was building for myself, a life free from manipulation and control. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, I was navigating it on my own terms, with my own compass to guide me. The inheritance had been a catalyst for this transformation, but the real change had come from within, from the strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to find it. 6 months after the court ruling,
my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The company I had founded, EduTech Solutions, was thriving, with 3 employees and a growing list of clients. We had just launched our first product, an interactive learning app designed to help children with dyslexia improve their reading skills. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling, a stark contrast to the soulless corporate job I had left behind. The legal proceedings against my parents continued to move forward, though at a pace that felt glacially slow. My father, facing overwhelming evidence, had accepted a plea bargain, receiving a 5-year sentence and an order to pay restitution. My mother, however, was fighting the charges, her lawyer arguing that she had been under my father's influence and should receive a lighter sentence. I tried to stay detached from the legal process, focusing instead on my work and personal growth. I had started therapy, working through the complex emotions that surfaced as I untangled myself from years of manipulation. It was during one of these sessions that my therapist suggested something that initially surprised me. "Have you considered reaching out to other family members?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Your grandmother, your aunts and uncles. They might have insights into your parents' behavior that could help you make sense of everything." The idea hadn't occurred to me. My relationship with my extended family had always been distant, largely due to my parents' influence. They had often spoken negatively about relatives, creating divisions that kept us isolated. But now I was curious. What did they know? When had they realized something was wrong? With some hesitation, I reached out to my Aunt Margaret, my grandmother's sister, and the closest thing I had to a grandmother now. We agreed to meet for lunch, and as I sat across from her in a quiet restaurant, I felt a nervous energy I couldn't quite explain. Aunt Margaret, a woman in her early 80s with sharp eyes and a warm smile, listened patiently as I shared my story. When I finished, she sighed, her expression a mixture of sadness and vindication. "I'm not surprised, Michael," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your grandmother worried about your parents for years. She saw their greed, their need for control, but she didn't know how to stop it without alienating you completely." She went on to share stories about my parents that painted a picture of a long-standing pattern of manipulation and entitlement. There was the time they had tried to convince my grandmother to give them money for a business venture that never materialized. The time they had borrowed a valuable heirloom and then claimed it had been lost. The countless times they had hinted that my grandmother was favoring me over them. "Your grandmother loved you deeply, Michael," Aunt Margaret said, her eyes filled with emotion. "She saw in you a kindness and integrity that your parents lacked. That's why she left you the inheritance. She wanted to ensure you had the resources to build a life free from their influence." As I listened, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began to fall into place. My grandmother's subtle guidance, her gentle encouragement to pursue my interests, her quiet warnings about people who might not have my best interests at heart. These weren't just the actions of a loving grandmother. They were the strategic moves of someone trying to protect me from harm. As I listened, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began to fall into place. My grandmother's subtle guidance, her gentle encouragement to pursue my interests, her quiet warnings about people who might not have my best interests at heart. These weren't just the actions of a loving grandmother. They were the strategic moves of someone trying to protect me from harm.
Aunt Margaret also revealed that my grandmother had changed her will multiple times over the years, each revision a response to some new attempt by my parents to gain control of her finances. The final version, which left everything to me, had been drafted just months before her death, after my parents had made yet another attempt to convince her to add them as beneficiaries. The day she came home from the lawyer's office, Aunt Margaret recalled, she told me, "Margaret, I've done everything I can to protect Michael. The rest is up to him now." This conversation with Aunt Margaret was a turning point for me. It provided a context for my parents' actions that went beyond simple greed. Their behavior was part of a lifelong pattern, a sense of entitlement that had been decades in the making. Understanding this didn't excuse their actions, but it did help me make sense of them. Inspired by this conversation, I reached out to other family members, including cousins I hadn't seen in years. Each conversation revealed another layer of the complex family dynamics, another piece of the puzzle. Some had been directly manipulated by my parents. Others had kept their distance out of self-preservation. But all of them, to some extent, had been affected by my parents' behavior. These connections also led to an unexpected discovery. During a conversation with my cousin Daniel, I learned about a family trust that had been established by my great-grandfather, a successful businessman who had anticipated that future generations might not all be responsible with money. The trust, which had been largely forgotten, was designed to provide support for family members who demonstrated financial responsibility and integrity. With Daniel's help, I contacted the trustee of the family trust, a law firm that had been managing it for over 50 years. To my surprise, I learned that I was eligible to receive support from the trust, not just financially, but through mentorship and networking opportunities. It seemed my great-grandfather had built-in safeguards to ensure that the trust would benefit family members who shared his values of hard work and integrity. This discovery felt like a gift from my ancestors, a validation of the path I had chosen. It also provided a sense of connection to a family history that had been largely hidden from me by my parents. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something larger than myself, a legacy that went beyond the immediate dysfunction of my nuclear family. As the months passed, my company continued to grow, and I found myself becoming more involved with the family trust, serving as a mentor to younger family members who were just starting their careers. I also reconnected with my extended family in ways I never had before, attending family gatherings and holidays that had once been off-limits due to my parents' influence. The legal proceedings against my mother concluded with a plea bargain, similar to my father's, but with a lighter sentence, due to her cooperation and the influence her husband had exerted over her. I didn't attend the sentencing, choosing instead to focus on my future rather than dwell on the past. A year after the court ruling, as I sat in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The inheritance had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had come from reclaiming my agency, building connections with my extended family, and discovering a legacy of integrity that had been waiting for me all along. 2 years after the court ruling, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. EduTech Solutions had outgrown its small office and moved into a larger space downtown, with a team of 15 dedicated employees working on innovative educational solutions. Our flagship product had won several awards, and we were in the process of developing new tools to help children with various learning challenges. I had also become more involved with the Family Trust, now serving on the committee that reviewed applications for support. It was rewarding to help other family members pursue their dreams, to provide the kind of encouragement and resources that had been denied to me for so long. Through this work, I had come to know my extended family in ways I never had before, discovering connections and shared values that transcended the dysfunction of my immediate family. My relationship with my parents remained distant, a necessary boundary for my own well-being. My father was still serving his sentence with no contact between us. My mother, having completed her probation, occasionally sent letters, but I had chosen not to respond. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Perhaps one day I would be ready to forgive, but that day had not yet come. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a new project proposal, I received a call from Catherine, my lawyer, who had become a trusted friend over the years. Her voice was uncharacteristically serious as she asked if we could meet. Concerned, I agreed to meet her at her office the next day. When I arrived, Catherine was waiting for me, a file on her desk and a concerned expression on her face. As I took a seat, she slid the file across the table. "Michael, I have some information that I think you need to know," she began, her tone measured. "It's about your parents, and it goes beyond what we uncovered during the initial case." She opened the file, revealing documents that detailed a complex web of financial manipulation that extended far beyond what I had previously known. According to these documents, my parents had not only exploited my finances, but had also manipulated other vulnerable family members, including elderly relatives and family members with special needs. "The investigation into your parents' finances revealed a pattern that goes back decades," Catherine explained. "They targeted family members who were isolated or vulnerable, using a combination of charm, intimidation, and legal manipulation to gain control of their assets." As I reviewed the documents, a cold dread settled over me. The scale of my parents' deception was far greater than I had imagined. They hadn't just been greedy, they had been predators, systematically taking advantage of people who trusted them. What was most shocking, however, was the discovery that my grandmother had been aware of some of this activity and had taken steps to counteract it. In addition to leaving me the inheritance, she had also been working with a private investigator to document my parents' activities, gathering evidence that could be used to protect other family members. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Michael," Catherine said, her voice filled with admiration. "She knew what was happening, but she was careful not to expose your parents until she had enough evidence to ensure they couldn't harm anyone else. The inheritance wasn't just about providing for you, it was also about giving you the resources to continue her work of protecting the family." This revelation was overwhelming. My grandmother, who had always seemed so gentle and unassuming, had been conducting a quiet battle against my parents' exploitation for years. She had been playing a long game, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. And in the end, she had passed the torch to me. As I left Catherine's office, my mind was racing with the implications of this new information. I had thought my battle was over, that I had moved on from the trauma of my parents' betrayal. But now I was faced with a choice: continue to focus on my own life and business, or take up the mantle my grandmother had passed to me and work to protect other family members from my parents' exploitation. Over the next few weeks, I wrestled with this decision. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave the past behind and focus on the future I had built for myself. But another part of me felt a sense of responsibility, a connection to my grandmother's legacy that I couldn't ignore. In the end, the decision was made for me by a call from a cousin I had never met. She was a young woman named Sophia, the granddaughter of my grandmother's brother, and she was in trouble. Her parents had passed away unexpectedly, leaving her a substantial inheritance. Now my parents, who had maintained a distant relationship with this branch of the family, were suddenly showing a great deal of interest in Sophia's welfare, offering to help her manage her inheritance. As I listened to Sophia's story, I heard echoes of my own experience. The subtle manipulation, the offers of help that came with strings attached, the gradual erosion of autonomy. I knew I couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself. With Catherine's help, I reached out to Sophia, offering support and guidance. We met, and I shared my story, watching as the pieces fell into place for her. Together, we put safeguards in place to protect her inheritance and autonomy from my parents' influence. This experience marked a turning point for me. I realized that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming my own life. It was about breaking a cycle of exploitation that had affected my family for generations. I decided to use my resources and experience to help others who might be in similar situations, creating a foundation within the family trust to provide education and support for financial literacy and protection against exploitation. Today, as I stand at the helm of a growing company and a foundation dedicated to protecting the vulnerable, I often think about my grandmother and the legacy she left me. The $2 million inheritance was substantial, but the real gift she gave me was the opportunity to reclaim my life and, in turn, help others do the same. My relationship with my parents remains complicated, a mix of anger, pity, and a lingering hope for redemption that may never be realized. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving others of their responsibility. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying their mistakes. As I look to the future, I do so with a sense of purpose that goes beyond personal success. The inheritance was the catalyst, but the journey has been about discovering who I am and what I value. It's been about building connections, reclaiming my heritage, and creating a legacy of integrity and compassion that honors my grandmother's memory. The road hasn't been easy, and there are still challenges ahead. But as I navigate this path, I do so with the knowledge that I am no longer a victim of circumstance, but the architect of my own destiny, guided by the values and legacy of those who came before me.